Hello, welcome back, Croeso. Yeah, I'll read a bit more on the introduction. This is the last bit on the introduction, right? It does set the scene and tells you, explains why it's an important book. And what we're looking at here is how the church, really, and politics has tried to crush British history as just not being acceptable. Particularly any notion of an early migration by British or Welsh to Americas. As far back as the 6th century, even earlier, but that just can't happen. Right, so okay, so we go here. If we look a little further, we see that the Christian Bible contains only a selection of the early Christian writings, and a very large number of texts were excluded from the Bible compilation of texts at Lyon that was used to form the present standard version. Many of these excluded texts are published as Apocrypha, and others as merely stray Christian texts, while others are ignored. Maybe you could also add the Gnostic Gospels to that as well. One early Christian document is the first epistle of St. Clement to the Corinthians, the epistle being the letter. And the author Clement is none other than Clement, the second bishop of Rome, after Linus, who was the son of King Cradock I. In modern times, this is the first epistle of St. Clement was published by Gramercy Books of New York under the title of, quote, The Lost Books of the Bible. So there's a book to look out for. The preamble of the text of this epistle states that Clement was a disciple of St. Peter and afterwards Bishop of Rome, not mentioning Linus, the first bishop, you notice, and proceeds to state, quotes, Clemens Alexandrinus calls him as apostle. Jerome, around 350, says that he was an apostolic man, and Rufinus that he was almost an apostle. Eusebius, writing around AD 325, calls this the wonderful epistle of St. Clement, and says that it was publicly read in the assemblies of the primitive church. It is included in one of the ancient collections of the canon scripture. Then comes the bombshell. Quotes, its genuineness has been much questioned, particularly by Photius, Patriarch of Constantinople, in the 9th century, who objects that Clement speaks of worlds beyond the ocean. Around AD 850, the Patriarch Photius attacked the first epistle of Clement on the grounds that Clement wrote of the existence of other worlds beyond the ocean, which means west beyond the Atlantic. Dimensions of the epistle by Eusebius, some 500 years earlier, around AD 325, also made by Jerome and Rufinus and Clements, confirm the document's antiquity, and that Photius was simply a dyed-in-the-wood fundamentalist churchman is fairly clear. The existence of other worlds would upset the dogmas that the entire human race has descended from the children of Noah after the near annihilation of the biblical flood. In chapter 9, verse 12, Clement wrote, the ocean unpassable, he said, the ocean unpassable to mankind, and the worlds that are beyond it are governed by the same commands of their master, God. There is no doubting the import of these words, which clearly state that there are other worlds beyond the Atlantic Ocean to the west of Europe. The British Cymry knew of those opposing Clement's statement. Clement, of course, was no peasant Christian, nor were the majority of early Christians drawn from what might be described as the lower classes. No. As shown elsewhere, the martyr and Bishop of Rome named Clement was almost certainly Titus Flavius Clemens, the son of Sabinus, who was a brother of the Emperor Vespasian. As a member of the leading family of Rome, Clement would have been very well educated, and there is no doubt among scholars that this Clement was well educated. So you go right back to 1st, 2nd century people talking of the other worlds, or to the west of the Atlantic. The preamble to this first epistle of St. Clement to the Corinthians shows how in later ages Archbishop Wake attempted to reason out Clement's thinking on a comparison of the rising and reincarnation of the legendary Phoenix of Egypt to the resurrection of Jesus the Nazarene. This comparison would have offended Photius, as the 500 years cycle of the reincarnation of the phoenix was a mythical legend that was not believed in, and then the reincarnation of Jesus Nazarene could also be regarded in the same light. If you create one reincarnation myth, are you implying the other one's a myth as well? The translation used by Gramercy books that was done by Archbishop Wake and was taken from the ancient Greek copy of the epistle, which is found at the end of the Alexandrine manuscript of the Septuagint and New Testament, which Cyril, the Patriarch of Alexandria, presented to King Charles I, and which is now in the British Museum. The main point is that Clement in the 1st century AD knew of the existence of other worlds out across the Atlantic Ocean. That Clement would have had direct contact with the early British Christians in Rome after AD 51 is a certainty. The detailed tracing of Clement's, you can read more about this in Where Jesus Was Buried, the book that talks about how Christianity came to Britain first after the crucifixion. The Holy Family, also including Jesus it would seem, came and settled in Wales, where they had their brethren, people already waiting for them. So we do expand on that, and Britain became the first Christian country in the world. So the detailed tracing of Clement's various writings by other ancient scholars is well known and well authenticated. Hundreds, if not thousands, of those who had access to this epistle down the ages would have known of the other world, which is far out to the west across the Atlantic. This is the real other world, which is described in a plethora of authentic ancient 6th century British texts. It was not a place of the corporate British national imagination, but simply the two continents that the Spanish and Portuguese of 1,000 years later were to call the New World. They call it the New World, ancient British call it the other world. It's not some Celtic mythology place. So there we go, that ends the introduction. I'm not going to do so much from each chapter, but I will be putting more up. Thanks for joining me, looking forward to your comments on this. Heather.